All right, guys, this is part 3 of the video of talking about why reserve lists should be abolished. The last video, Brian actually, if you guys go back to it, video number 2, Brian in the very end talked about cryptocurrency, how the injection of capital has also gone to reserve list cards. I personally think that is the strongest argument I've heard thus far to support why it should not be abolished.
I have several very strong, I think, rebuttals.
All right, go ahead.
The first point is that you guys are putting way too much emphasis on the reserve list. There are cards that are high-end cards that are not on the reserve list. If you track the prices of non-reserve list cards that are alpha beta, the rate of increase, I suspect, is well within range of the increase of reserve list cards. So for example, if you look at alpha Swords to Plowshares, Sarah Angel, those kinds of cards, the rate of increase probably matches, non-reserve list card, probably matches reserve list cards, which to me is the strongest argument that no one has made that is a very, very, very important point. Very.
All right, I'm awake.
Right? I mean, it's a very, very important point because
Brian, very.
It is very important. A very important point.
Yes.
That's only my first point.
That's a good point.
The second point I want to make is that there's an empirical test. We can test the value and the rise in plateau of cryptocurrencies and transfer of capital into Magic. I would posit, and I think there's a way of running a test to see this. I actually think that if you run the correlation between the cryptocurrency decline and transfer of money into old school prices, the correlation line chart, the correlation graph is actually weaker than the correlation between the rise and frequency of old school communities and the rise of prices. That is, I think the price increase. This is just as important as my first point.
All right, guys, we're at the train station for the next stop.
Press pause.
We'll pause here and we'll be right back. All right, guys, we're back. Now we're at the Starbucks waiting for the next train. Sorry about that. Where do we leave off?
So what I just was making, Brian had made some very strong points. Brian was just talking about cryptocurrency. The first point I made is that the way that we know the reserve list is not actually functioning the way Brian thinks it is that if you compare the prices of reserve list cards versus non-reserve list old school cards, the rate of value increase in non-reserve list cards matches that of reserve list cards. Therefore, like the value increases in Alpha Soul Ring, Alpha Sarah Angel, Alpha Swords to Plowshares have increased essentially at the same rate or greater than most of the reserve list cards. The second point I was going to make is that Brian's theory about cryptocurrency, I think it's true. I think a lot of cryptocurrency wealthy people use their capital and shift it into Magic cards. Not just reserve list cards, but old school Magic cards. Now here's the problem. The issue is that that's testable. We can actually, whatever the theory is, whatever you think the theory is, there should be an empirical relationship. You should be able to draw a line graph of cryptocurrency and get the data on the rises in Magic card values, old school Magic values, and find the correlation. You'd be able to see when people move money in, and you should be able to see what the statistical correlation is. Now, here's my rebuttal. My rebuttal is, although there is a statistical correlation, I think there's another stronger correlation between the overall escalation in old school prices and with one other factor, and that variable is the increase and frequency of old school communities. That as old school communities begin popping up, the overall arc of value of the last 10 years in old school cards more tightly fits, from a regression perspective, that than the cryptocurrency. I think what's ultimately, let me step back then. So there's an empirical test that we can test. We can test Brian's theory, we can test mine. I think mine is probably empirically right. But there's a larger, more important point, and it's how they dovetail. The important point is this: if you simulate the world, if you were to run a simulation of the world, a model of the world, and you do a model of the world, you rerun the world in a model in which there's no old school communities existing, I don't even think you have the cryptocurrency thing that happens. And here's why. The cryptocurrency into Magic thing. Because here's what happens. The rate of increase in the value of old school cards was a direct byproduct of the increased value and interest in old school, which was partly nostalgia. And all it takes is a small number of people chasing an even smaller number of cards to create annual large rate increases in the value of cards that exceed that which you can get in the regular market, greater than 8-10%, right? And if you have prices that are going up by 30, 40, 50, even 100% or more on an annual basis, then year after year after year, what happens is capital is going to go wherever it can get a higher rate of return. And so what happens is old school creates the context in which the rate of return is high, and therefore people start putting money, capital into those things. I think if you re-simulate the world with no old school, there's not the trigger in the first place in which that rate of return is visible, and then people are pouring their money into it.
Brian's had a rebuttal. I have a quick comment for that.
Yeah.
Don't say anything for a second. Question. Is there more old school player money, or is there more old school investor money, reserveless money, in terms of money and also a number? And hold on a sec. And the thing is, it's
cart and the horse. It's cart and the horse. The horse is the old school community. The cart is the investors that follow it. That's my point.
Is there more investors or is there more players?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because what I'm saying.
You're saying the old school. You're saying the horse, the old school players.
Yes.
Actually pushes it.
If you rerun the world.
Yes.
I'll say it one more time. You rerun the world, and you go, and the simulation goes back to 2000, let's say 9, and there's no burgeoning old school formats. Then the world that we're in right now is you simply. This is what I said earlier, and you both strongly objected. I think if you rerun the world with no old school communities observing, you don't have massive capital investing in old school cards. There may be some, but not nearly the degree today.
That's a good point.
Because the rate of increase would not have made New York Times. Hold on. Yes, it would not have made New York Times articles. It wouldn't have been on Wired. It wouldn't have been YouTube videos.
Okay.
People like you.
Stop right there, Brian. That's a good point. We'll leave that off.
You.
Basically, what he's saying is that if old school players were the horse, in this case, communities did not exist and drive it, there would be no mass fandom over this. Agreed or not? Speed of growth?
I first heard about old school format, I think, at PAX in 2015. I remember running. It was the year. Yeah, it was the year that they held Worlds at the WotC event at PAX. They were holding it in tandem. I think that was 2015. And I remember chatting with Randy about some old school format tournament that he had just played in.
I told him about it on
Randy Buehler, guys. Randy Buehler.
Yeah, that's Randy Buehler. 2015, right? That's just a few years ago. But the prices of these cards have been going up steadily since well before 2015. I think you talked about a period of stability, so something like
NOOBCON 11.
Hold on.
Using Juzam Jin as an example, right?
Speak double louder.
Yeah, no, I didn't see. I had no awareness of old school as a format. I certainly didn't see a massive price increase until 2015. In fact, it was in 2015 when I went to Card Kingdom and looked at some of the old school staples that I had actually either sold or traded away from my old deck. So, for example, I had a Beta Brain Geyser that I traded away. I had a pair of Disrupting Scepters that I think I had sold to somebody because they had been moldering in my binder for 10 years, and I thought, I'm never going to use these things again, right? Why would I ever use Beta Disrupting Scepter? It makes no sense. I sold it for $15 or $20 at the time. And I remember going to Card Kingdom and being upset that they didn't have any Beta Disrupting Scepters for sale in 2015 at their $30, $35 price point or whatever. They hadn't skyrocketed yet. But according to Steven, old school had been around for a long time. It was played more as a niche format in Sweden. Because the format has been around for a long time, and yet the prices were languishing, and my awareness as someone that loves that format and had still had pretty much my entire collection, I feel like I would kind of be the target demographic for old school if old school were a driving force behind the secondary market for that stuff. And it certainly seems like I would have been aware of it well before 2015, and the prices would have been moving at a more rapid rate if people were engaged with old school.
They were. Just because you didn't know about it doesn't mean it wasn't happening.
Again, this is just speaking to the idea of cryptocurrency driving the speculative market far more than old school was. Old school has been around for a lot longer, but I don't think was a driving force behind the price spike just because there aren't that many people playing it. You're dealing with such a tiny population of people.
So what is a driving force?
He already said it's crypto.
No.
You're missing. I think you're discounting another very, very important thing. And I honestly think that probably what's driving it more, crypto is one component of it, but I think what's likely driving a huge amount of the price.
You're listening, right?
I am. I'm going to draw a graph.
It's the fact that if you look at the ages of people the ages of people, the average age of a person who's interested
Louder.
in buying old
There it
school
is.
stuff, who has a particular nostalgic feel for those
Yeah.
cards because they played with them as a teenager.
I want you to listen to this part.
I am. I know his point.
Okay, no.
His point is that
No, don't let him finish the point.
His point is that
You're
people.
welcome to state my point for me.
No. Let him say it. Stop talking. Go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry.
At what age do you have to be to go and have two things? A very powerful and deep nostalgic attraction and interest in the old school cards and the old school art and what they mean to you, and the capital to invest in them. Well, those two lines sort of probably intersect in your early 30s.
Right.
Early to mid 30s.
Right.
Now, people are not in their early to mid 30s 10 years ago. They're not in their early to mid 30s 15 years ago. They still harbor those same nostalgic feelings, but they don't have the capital yet because they're not professionals. They're not further advanced in their life. I think that those are likely the vehicles that are driving the value. It's a combination of crypto. I think it's a combination of the fact that people are looking for things that they fundamentally understand, that things that have personal value to them, to invest their money in. They go, okay, well, I have money now. I have $50,000, $100,000 that I want to put into something. I don't want to buy mutual funds. I don't want to buy CDs. I don't want to buy traditional means
Unexciting stocks.
Great,
Yeah.
buying things that don't mean anything to me, right? I want to look for things that are exciting to me. Well, Magic is awesome. I played Magic when I was a teenager. I played Magic when I was in college. Now I'm 35 and I've got plenty of money now and I'm looking for things to buy. Well, hell, Magic cards are awesome. My friends still talk about this game. I go and look at it online. Holy shit, the prices are really high now. They're much higher. The cards that I own from back then are valuable. I'm going to go and buy some more because I want to put my money into something that I understand, that I feel passion for. And I think that that nostalgia and that interest, that renewed interest, has been sort of gradually gaining steam as the player base has been aging and acquiring more capital. I think that that is likely the more driving force in this tiny little niche old school community that makes up such a tiny, tiny proportion that wasn't even really engaged. I wasn't even aware of it until 2015, even though it had been going on in the shadows for, 6, 7 years prior to that. I'm not sure when the first NOOBCON was. But certainly there are people who have that interest
that was 10 years
in
ago.
older formats.
This is NOOBCON 11.
And you're missing one incredibly important point, Stephen, and this relates to why some of the staples of the format, rather than the reserve list cards, are valuable. You know what it is, honestly? I think a huge part of it, it's Commander format. It's something
Louder.
that you don't, it's Commander format.
Commander.
It's something that you don't have any experience with.
Yep.
Commander is a tremendous vanity format. And many of the reserve list staples, are not reserve list staples, but old school staples are super prestigious in Commander format.
The old frame ones,
Yes,
especially,
exactly.
what you're
You
claiming.
wouldn't believe the amount of people when
Yes.
I play a Beta Swords to Plowshares or I play a Beta Soul Ring in Commander format, people get up out of their seats and look over at it. That is the feeling that people want to have. They want to evoke that feeling in the people, not only in themselves, but in the people they play against. That is a good feeling.
Brian, not to interrupt, Stephen.
We got to get going. So do you want me to give me my rebuttal?
Oh, how many minutes do we have?
We have to actually go now.
I'm in the middle of a point, no rebuttals. I'm going to continue this on the train.
Go. Okay, here's and also, before we continue that, real quick, Time Twister increased in value
It's a reserve
because of
card.
Commander. It was, hold on, listen. Commander is what allowed Time Twister to grow because it's unbanned. Or, yeah.
It's legal in Commander.
It's the only Power 9. All right,
we'll
we'll come back to that in a second.
Ongoing endless debate.
This is the ongoing debate for the entire NOOBCON. We're on the Swiss train. Are we sure the right train to go to the Alps?
Yes.
All right, so do you guys understand what he's saying?
Yeah, let Brian finish his point. Go ahead.
Where do we leave off?
I was in the middle of talking about Commander format as something that is not on Steven's radar in terms of pushing.
I understand it,
but I'm sure that I've been steeped in the Commander format for the past 6 years. It's been the format that I played. While you've been continuing to be interested in vintage and so on, Commander's really been the thing that's driven my enthusiasm for Magic and nearly all of my time engagement. My YouTube channel is devoted to Commander. It's the format that I play by far the most. And there's two components to it, actually. I was talking about the emotional component and this sort of attractiveness. There's one thing that anybody that's collecting old Magic cards who is interested in actually playing with them is chasing a particular feeling. The feeling is, I play something that's old and prestigious and special, be it something that's more affordable, like simply a revised dual land, like an underground sea in
Or
my
a beta
in my
basic
commander deck.
island.
Or a beta basic
Yeah, who
island, or
cares?
something really high end,
Yeah.
like a beta dual land, or an alpha dual land.
Yep.
When you play that card, when you put that card in your deck, when you make the investment to actually have that card, you are chasing a particular feeling, right? That feeling is, I play the card and everybody takes notice. It causes a ripple across the table. Some friends some guy you're playing against waves his buddy over, who comes over and looks at the card and goes, wow, I've never seen X before. If you have invested in those cards, that's the feeling you're trying to chase. You're trying to evoke that feeling in the people you're playing with. You're making a statement by putting those expensive cards in your deck. People are making that same decision. They're chasing that feeling when it comes to buying something like a beta Fireball, or a beta Swords to Plowshares, or a beta Disenchant, or a beta Counterspell, or beta Control Magic. One of those now high-value staple cards that you were saying lie outside of this speculative framework that we were talking about that's driving the sort of high-end market. You were saying, well, if the reserve list is what's driving these prices, then why are the staples so valuable too? Why is Beta Swords to Plowshares $500? Why is Beta Soul Ring $800, right? If those cards are not on the reserve list, then they're not. They've been reprinted countless times. Why is there this completely insane disparity between a 25-cent Swords to Plowshares and a $500 one when it's functionally an identical card? The reason is Commander format. It's because that feeling.
Well, hold on. It's not the only reason. It's the sum of it
That is
all.
one of the primary reasons.
The sum of the cart.
The commander population is
Yeah.
gargantuan. It is so huge compared to pretty much every. I believe it is the most common way.
It dominates
people
all those
engage
things we
with
mentioned
paper
already.
Magic.
Yeah.
Online, Standard is played the most because Standard is what's being pushed on Arena, and you can't play Commander on Arena. But in paper, most people who play Magic outside of limited formats are playing Constructed Commander. That's what people are playing. And if you play Constructed Commander, if you want to make a statement, if you want to pimp out your deck, you pimp out your deck with either foils, or you pimp out your deck with beta and alpha cards. That's how you get that same feeling of prestige. Yeah, we're here.
All right, guys, we'll go back on the train. We'll be right back. That's a really, really good point. Commander is what has made Soul Ring, all those staples, valuable also. All right, we're back. We're on the train to where we're going?
We're going to Lauterbrunnen.
All right, we're going to the Swiss Alps, supposedly. All right, so what is your response? Brian's going to the bathroom.
I'll make a couple of points just to contextualize this, because we don't want to lose the forest for the trees. The debate is really over the reserve list. Specifically, should it exist? Should it continue to exist? Is it a good thing, a bad thing? For financial, social, economic, promissorial reasons, aesthetic, even just trust reasons. The specific debate, sub-debate we've been caught in is over what effect the reserve list has, and that's led us into a sub-debate about what forces, specifically what variables, are causing the rate of increase in Magic staples, specifically old school cards. And so we've been debating various causes. I think Brian's model of the universe is basically wrong in terms of explanatory causes. First of all, let me talk a little bit about causation. Causation is enormously complicated. When you think about causality, think about dominoes, right? You click a domino, it hits multiple dominoes. You can have two dominoes fall at once and cause something to happen, right? You need two elements to come together to make water. You need multiple things to happen. So there's sufficient causality, necessary conditions. There's, in law, there's proximate causation and but-for causation. There's different forms of causality. I think basically what's driven the prices of Magic cards are a confluence of factors. I think we've named almost all of them. The disagreement is really over emphasis. We know that the people who grew up playing Magic in the early 90s now have enough income and wealth and capital that they can spend more money. So that's part of what's happened. I think it's old school, I think it's Commander, I think it's vintage, I also think it's investors. But here's the thing. The specific question is, what has driven the rate of increase in the last 15 years on old school, specifically 1993-94 Magic cards? What? And we've basically circled in the last 2.5 videos a number of different answers. In the most recent, Brian's basically come down to a model where he said cryptocurrency in the last 2 years, in the kind of the exit from cryptocurrency, putting capital into old school, and I point out the problem with that model, and so he supplemented that with an additional theory, which is Commander. Okay. What I'm saying is I think that's a simplistic model and it's ultimately wrong. I think what's actually driven...
Just have headphones on, dude.
I think what's driven the price of what I was just saying, Brian, is that at bottom, this is now a debate over what's caused the rate of increase in old school Magic cards.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're talking about. And it's a sub-debate regarding the reserve list, because we're debating the effects of the reserve list. And your model is, what you basically articulated was cryptocurrency, people moving capital out of that into old school cards as investments. And then when I pointed out some of the flaws in that, I said, well, why is the rate of increase in non-reserve list cards at or equal to, at or greater than that of reserve list cards? You've supplemented that with Commander. I think that your model is just basically, you've got 2 of the correct variables, but there's about 6 variables, and you've got 2 of the least important variables. I think that the most...
Did you say the least important?
Yeah, if there's 6...
Jesus Christ, Steven.
No, I'm serious.
Steven, why is Commander the least important, one of the least important? How is that possible?
I will explain.
All right.
So, what are all the variables that's increased? I think one of the most important variables is what we've already said, which is that people who are now in their mid-30s, were in their teens in 1993, 94, have income and wealth that they can spend. That's only going to increase over time.
Yeah, of course.
The nostalgia waves have hit. Wow, beautiful. Look at this. Beautiful.
Screw California.
Nostalgia waves have hit basically every area of gaming. You have people who are buying Nintendo Minis. You have people who want to see like toys from the 80s and 90s. Yep. So nostalgia waves hit about 2.5 decades later, and that's hit Magic as well. I think it's a huge factor.
You got high-end collectibles for video games, $100,000 for the Mario Brothers.
It happens exactly. Yeah. So I think that's one of the key factors. Yep. But what I am saying at core is that there was a rate of increase that on old school Magic cards that hit a certain level, such that once that rate became consistent year after year after year, it created a clear trend line that gave investors confidence that this is a safe investment and one that will continue to appreciate. And I'm saying that you can create a world without old school. If you model the world without old school whatsoever, I don't think that exists. I think that there is a rate of increase, but it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient.
Are you talking about the rate, or are you talking about the reaching?
Look, this is what, when you were in the restaurant...
Hold on, ask you a question. The rate or the reaching?
I don't know what you mean by rate or reaching.
What I mean, what you're claiming, this is your claim, is that old school Magic, the player side, the tournaments or the groups, whatever, the fandom community, has risen it to a new level. Without the horse, it would have never got to this point.
No, old school is the horse, the investors are the cart that followed. What I'm saying is this.
With cows.
This is complicated.
The horse, the cow.
This is complicated because there's multiple causality. Anytime you have multiple causality, you can't reduce it to a single variable. So the question is, what are the key variables?
Do you disagree that old school Magic players have not increased the interest?
No, he says like one of the things that
just
hold on. Do you disagree?
Just no matter what component are they of the price, and honestly, my take on it is that a sizable portion of old school players already had their cards to begin with.
Louder, yeah.
And only dusted those cards off and re-engaged with the format.
Big shaking of the head.
Yes.
Total. This is where you guys disagree completely.
So I started playing.
Okay. Hold on. I have to put my point on that. I actually agree that it's in the middle.
Okay.
I'm in the middle of that.
Let me. So Brian said he heard about old school in 2015.
Yeah.
Okay. I organized the first old school in the Bay Area in 2013. I started acquiring cards. I'd heard about it in probably around 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
There were throwback tournaments that were organized even before that. In the United States, in Pittsburgh, I started acquiring cards for old school in 2012. I systematically went on Star City Games and began buying cards. I bought 4 Alpha Juggernauts, 4 Alpha Sonic Glass, just systematically began acquiring Legends, Arabian Nights.
Steven was telling me the right articles, and he told me you should be buying these cards, and I was already buying them anyway. But the thing is, I accelerated buying
in 2012.
Yeah.
So I organized the first event in the Bay Area in 2013.
Yeah.
On the first season of the Vintage Super League, I told everyone at the Vintage Super League, I said that old school would be played.
2012.
No, 2014, the very first season of the Vintage Super League, on camera. I told Randy Bueller, I said that the old school tournament is going to be played at Eternal Central, the second annual one. And he didn't even know anything about it at the time. He said, well, that sounds interesting. I was talking about it. Because his reaction showed that he hadn't heard of it before.
Yeah.
So I told literally a huge audience of thousands of people in 2014 that old school was a thing. And there wasn't just me, it was the old school blog, lots of people. I think the purchase, I didn't go on Twitter, I didn't announce in 2012 I'm buying all these things, but I knew lots of people who were. I know lots of people who are buying up cards as of 2012. What I'm saying is this. The world is complicated, there's lots of variables, but if you re-simulate the world where there's no old school communities emerging,
Zero.
Zero.
Okay.
I don't think you're even close to the situation you're in now. And the reason, the question you ask is, what percentage of old school explains the price? There's a huge problem with that framing of the question. When you say, Daniel, or Brian says, what percentage of old school explains the price of old school cards? That question actually completely obscures and masks the causality of the model I'm describing. Because what I'm saying is the price is not being driven by old school players. The trigger that created the environment in which old school cards were viewed as an investment vehicle was created by old school cards. Yeah. That's the subtlety. Yeah, that's the nuance that I'm saying.
Sure I think it's inevitability. That's my belief.
That's possible, but
Brian, it's inevitability. It was inevitable that people, like you said,
Does my model make sense?
Your model has validity.
Do you think I'm right?
I don't think you're 100% right.
Well,
because the commentary that Brian did earlier, guys, Brian had two hands sticking out, fingers together. You said age of value of wealth and your age of career mirrored together cause this occur.
Yes, but what
These sequence of events is what causes
Daniel,
it higher than anything you're saying. Anything you're saying.
Daniel, all those things map to my model. My model is one that incorporates those points, right?
How does this incorporate with the reserve list, by the way? Just sum it up in the reserve
I'm
list.
just going to say something. Okay,
Yeah,
we've
fine.
certainly gotten into the weeds a little bit because
Jesus.
our
We need to, yeah.
fundamental debate was about the reserve list in general. And since you like to talk about rewinding the world in some sort of hypothetical situation, what if we rewind the world and we reprint the reserve list, including the Power 9 with shitty alternate art in 2005 or 2009 or whatever? Who gives a shit about old school?
Everyone.
Honestly.
No, listen.
I totally disagree.
Yeah.
Listen.
I am.
Yeah.
I totally disagree. I think that old school is special, and old school is something that people pursue and want to play because of the rarity of the cards, because of this special place that they occupy in people's hearts. I think that if it's suddenly this mainstream thing and every kid has a set of Moxes and a Black Lotus and whatever, I don't think that old school ever arises. I don't think that anyone has any interest in it at all, because everybody gets the opportunity to play with that, to play with those cards, and I think that to a modern Magic player, to people who have been steeped in Commander and Standard, going back and playing these long plodding games that are 31 mana source decks and turn after turn after turn of draw go with nothing happening, I think to a modern player whose only entire experiences with contemporary Magic in the last 10 years of design, where the decks are basically these mana curve linear decks that essentially play themselves, or they play Hearthstone, or they come from other gaming experiences, to that player, they look at these old cards and they go, why the hell would I want to play this format where we just sit around on our hands and do nothing? That just is nostalgic to these 40-year-old guys with neckbeards. Like, that's...
Brian, hold on. Brian is exactly right. No, hold on. Brian said something very... No, listen, this is what Brian said.
I listen carefully.
You
keep telling me to hold on, but you're not having him hold on.
I have something that Brian has made a very good point.
I think he's completely wrong.
No, Brian's made a good point. Hold on, I'm gonna sum it up to you. If you listen, if you reprint these cards, and these newer players are not gonna give a rat's ass about older cards, because I'll tell you why. The reason why
not older cards now.
they're not exactly. Hold on. They're not. Hold on. They're not special.
They're not special
at all. They're not special.
That is the most valid
they're
point.
not. They're all your
idea of it being
special. It has to be. It has to be historic.
Totally disagree. On almost every level.
Oh my God.
Does creating new Nintendo games with Mario and Zelda make NES Zelda and Mario less special? No.
You're talking. Wait, hold on a sec. What are you doing,
Steven?
That's a video game.
It's the same point. Listen.
Is there collectability in video games?
Daniel,
no, come on,
Daniel,
Steven.
be fair. If you're going to videotape this, be fair.
I am being fair. I'm not
neutral.
How many players who
I'm
play
in Switzerland.
modern
I am
Zelda
neutral.
and Mario games go back and want to play Super Mario Brothers or even care about it?
Listen.
They play the modern versions of those games.
I totally disagree with you.
And that's exactly how modern Magic players interface with it too. They don't care about the nostalgia. They don't. They have no emotional attraction. They have no emotional attachment to it at all.
Old school communities are not primarily driven by new players, Brian. They're primarily driven by players who played back in the day and want to pick up what they experienced when they were teenagers.
So what is
Or
the point of
adults.
reprinting those staples? Does it make any sense
You
at
just
all?
you know what you just said?
You alienated
You alien
all
you
those
just
dudes.
you just what you just said. I have to rewind this. You just said what Brian. You confirmed what Brian said.
I agree
Why
with
would
it.
reprinting the cards actually bring in new players? No one's going to want to play.
All you do
That's
is
what you just said.
alienate all
Can
the
I
people.
respond?
Yeah,
Can I respond,
Fine.
please, without
Fine.
being interrupted?
Okay, fine.
I'm getting a
Fine,
little
fine,
annoyed.
I have to be more
I'm getting a
neutral.
little
I have to be
annoyed.
more-
I'm getting a little annoyed.
I-
Look, listen. Old school Magic is about players who want to pick up the experience of playing Type 1 or Type 2 back in 1993, 94, 95. Alpha 40, right? To them, the issue as to what effect the reserve list has or not, this all redounds to my argument side. My argument is that the reserve list does not have, if you abolish the reserve list, it does not have a negative effect on old school players and or old school investors. And the reason is because if these cards were printed in 2005, let's say that they were printed, let's follow my original thought experiment, that the Power 9 was reprinted in Vintage Masters paper in 2008, okay? Which is 2019, summer of 2018. It would have zero effect on old school players because old school players want to play in the environment of old school. They want to play with Arabian Nights cards, they want to play in that meta game, they want to play with antiquities. It's not about whether they can access a Black Lotus. It's not about whether Black Lotus is special. It's about the environment of playing those cards in the original context. And so that's why reprinting those cards would have I think zero impact. Old school players wouldn't even
Zero
care.
impact financially.
No, not listening in terms of the
Gameplay.
the gameplay, because
Okay.
the old school players.
So no
old school
growth,
players-
no growth.
Old school player, no.
What is the purpose
Listen,
of doing it? What
The
do you
purpose
gain?
is
What
there's
do you
no
gain?
harm. There's no harm.
There's no harm?
There's tremendous harm. Honestly.
Okay, guys, hold on a second. I gotta use the restroom. All right, we're gonna come back to this. We'll also talk more about Alpha 40 and how reprinting stuff would actually maybe affect nostalgia and Alpha 40 also. Okay, think about that one. Bye.